The rain tapped steadily against the windows of Grandma's old farmhouse, casting a dull gray over the living room where we all sat, cousins, aunts, uncles, dressed in black, speaking in hushed voices. The smell of strong coffee and the fading scent of Grandma's lavender perfume filled the air, wrapping the house in a bittersweet nostalgia. I sat by the fireplace, clutching the edges of my jacket, feeling like a guest in a life I used to belong to. Grandma had been the heart of our family, the one who kept the chaos at bay, who made every Christmas, every birthday feel like magic. Now, without her, the air felt heavier, different. My older brother, Daniel, stood confidently in the center of the room, flipping casually through the leather folder that contained Grandma's will. His smile was subtle but unmistakable, a thin line of triumph, barely hidden behind false grief. When the lawyer began to read, I watched Daniel's smirk grow. "All assets," the lawyer said, clearing his throat, "are to be entrusted to Daniel Martin, eldest grandson." A stunned silence fell over the room. I felt my stomach drop. Something wasn't right. And deep in my pocket, my fingers brushed the corner of an old sealed envelope, Grandma's real last words. Daniel didn't even wait for the meeting to end. He stood, shaking hands with the lawyer, laughing under his breath as he tucked the documents into his coat. "Better luck next time," he whispered to me as he passed, loud enough for a few family members to hear. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to stand up and call him out right there. But Grandma had always taught me better. "Patience reveals the truth," she used to say, her voice soft but firm, like the crackling of a warm fire. The others started to drift away, murmuring condolences that sounded hollow now. I stayed seated, staring into the empty fireplace. The envelope burned against my palm. It was old, yellowed at the edges, sealed with wax. On the front, written in Grandma's careful, looping handwriting, were the words, "For when the truth must be known." I swallowed hard. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had fooled everyone. But he didn't know about the letter. And I wasn't sure yet what it said. But somehow, I knew it would change everything. That night I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, the walls still covered with fading posters and old school awards. The house creaked in the wind, and outside, the branches of the giant oak tree scratched against the glass like ghostly fingers. I stared at the envelope for what felt like hours before finally breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Grandma's familiar hand. Tears blurred my vision as I read the first lines. "If you're reading this, it means the truth was hidden. Daniel was never meant to have it all." My heart raced. She went on to explain everything. The secret accounts she had set up for each grandchild, the instructions she had left with the lawyer, and most importantly, her reasons for dividing the inheritance fairly. She knew Daniel would try to manipulate things. She had seen it coming. Taped to the back of the letter was a key and a note. "Go to the sewing room, look behind the wall panel." I looked up, my heart pounding. I had a choice now: stay quiet or uncover everything and face Daniel head on. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up. It was time to bring the truth into the light. The sewing room still smelled faintly of Grandma's rose oil, a soft, lingering scent that made my chest ache. I closed the door quietly behind me, my footsteps muffled by the old woven rug. The walls were lined with shelves of colorful fabric and jars of buttons just like I remembered from when I was little. I found the panel easily. Grandma had pointed it out once years ago, joking that everyone needs a secret hiding spot. At the time, I thought it was just one of her stories. I slipped the key into the small hidden lock near the baseboard. It clicked open with a soft metallic snap. Behind the panel was a heavy metal box. My hands trembled as I lifted it out and set it on the table. Inside, neatly organized, were copies of documents, bank statements, property deeds, letters between Grandma and her lawyer, all proving that the inheritance was meant to be divided equally among all the grandchildren. At the very top was another envelope addressed to the family. My throat tightened. This was it. The proof Daniel thought was buried with her. I realized then, Grandma had trusted me to finish what she couldn't. I called for another family meeting the next day. This time I was the one standing at the center of the room. Everyone gathered slowly, some looking confused, others wary. Daniel leaned casually against the mantel, arms crossed, a mocking grin on his face. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. "You planning another funeral speech?" I ignored him and placed the metal box on the coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound seemed to suck the air out of the room. "This," I said, lifting Grandma's final letter, "is what she really wanted." I began reading aloud, my voice shaking but growing stronger with every word. Grandma's wishes were clear. She wanted fairness, family unity, love above all things. She hadn't chosen Daniel to inherit everything. He had lied, manipulated, betrayed. Gasps filled the room, eyes widened, whispers started. Daniel's smirk faded as the weight of the truth began to crush him in front of everyone. When I finished, I looked up and locked eyes with him. He looked away. For the first time, he looked afraid. But I wasn't done yet. There was still more hidden in that box, things Daniel would do anything to keep buried. Daniel tried to recover, straightening his jacket and forcing a laugh. Are we really going to believe some old scribbles on paper? Anyone could have written that. But the room didn't move. No one backed him up. Aunt Maria, Grandma's closest daughter, stepped forward. Her voice cracked with emotion. "That's her handwriting. I'd know it anywhere." Others nodded, murmuring agreements. The walls Daniel had so carefully built around himself were beginning to crack, piece by piece. I pulled out the bank documents next, laying them out for everyone to see. Pages of statements, transactions Grandma had meticulously organized to protect what was ours. Daniel's face paled, sweat beaded at his forehead. I did what I had to," he burst out suddenly, voice sharp and defensive. "You wouldn't understand. Grandma always favored me." "She favored honesty," I said, my voice steady. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Aunt Maria reached for the documents, tears in her eyes. "We need to fix this," she said softly. "We need to make it right." But Daniel wasn't finished. As he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. The house felt heavier after Daniel's outburst, as if Grandma's old walls were holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. I sat with Aunt Maria and a few of the cousins at the dining table, papers spread out before us. We read every line, every note Grandma had left behind. Some documents were simple, like savings account records, but others hinted at something deeper, something Daniel had been hiding long before Grandma passed. "He took loans against her properties," Aunt Maria whispered, disbelief thick in her voice. "Without telling anyone." The blood in my veins turned to ice. Outside the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. A cold wind rattled the windows. It felt like even the house was grieving, not just for Grandma, but for what Daniel had turned her legacy into. I thought about confronting him right then, marching to his apartment across town, demanding answers. But deep down, I knew Daniel wouldn't come clean so easily. He had spent years building this lie. It would take more than truth to undo it. It would take courage, and maybe a few secrets of my own. I found myself wandering up to the attic that night, flashlight in hand. Dust floated in the beam like tiny spirits as I climbed the narrow stairs. The attic had always been off limits when we were kids. "Too dangerous," Grandma used to say. But now, standing here as an adult, I realized she had been protecting more than just our safety. Boxes upon boxes lined the walls, photos, letters, records, memories of a life lived fully. And then, in the far corner, I found an old cedar chest. The lock had long since rusted away. Inside were more documents, letters Grandma had written but never sent. A diary, and at the bottom, a battered photo album. I flipped through it, my fingers trembling. Photos of Grandma and a young Daniel, and a man I didn't recognize. Behind one photo was a handwritten note. The truth about Daniel's father, for when the family needs to understand. My heart pounded louder than the wind outside. Grandma had hidden something bigger than just bank accounts. Daniel's lies ran deeper than any of us had ever known. I couldn't sleep. I barely breathed. Sitting on the floor of the attic, I read through Grandma's diary, each page more devastating than the last. Daniel wasn't who he thought he was. He wasn't even legally Grandma's heir. Years ago, before Daniel was born, Grandma had taken in her sister's orphaned son, raising him as her own after a terrible accident. But legally, Daniel wasn't part of the inheritance chain unless specifically named, and Grandma had never formally changed her will. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time, Daniel had claimed entitlement, demanded loyalty, seized control, but in the eyes of the law and of Grandma's true wishes, he had no right. The betrayal wasn't just his. It was ours too, for believing the story he'd woven around himself. I looked out the attic window at the stars scattered across the dark sky. Tomorrow, at the final meeting, I would have a choice: protect Daniel's secret, or finally reveal the truth to everyone. And watching how far he was willing to go, I knew he would never forgive me if I did. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside Grandma's window, the same window I used to stare out of as a child, dreaming of adventures far beyond the hills. Today, the real adventure was right here. Word had spread. Everyone was coming back for one final meeting, even Daniel, who, despite everything, still believed he could bluff his way through. I packed the photo album, Grandma's letter, and her diary carefully into a satchel. Downstairs, the air was tense. Aunt Maria clutched her rosary, whispering prayers under her breath. The others sat stiffly, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. When Daniel arrived, he walked in with a swagger, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Ready for round 2?" he sneered. I stood up slowly, the satchel in my hand feeling heavier than stone. "This time, Daniel," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade, "you won't be able to lie your way out." For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Just a flash. But I saw it. I took a deep breath. Today, the truth would either heal this family or tear it apart for good. I laid the items on the coffee table carefully, as if handling ancient artifacts. The others leaned in, curiosity battling fear across their faces. I started with Grandma's diary, reading the entries about Daniel's true parentage, her sorrow, her hope that one day he would understand he didn't need money to belong. Murmurs spread through the room. Some gasped. Others simply sat, stunned. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightened. "It's a lie," he spat. "You faked all this." I held up the notarized letter Grandma had hidden, her final words, written and witnessed by her closest friend in the town, Mrs. Patel, the librarian. Her handwriting was unmistakable, swirling across the yellowed paper. "Daniel is loved as my own, but the inheritance must be shared fairly among all my grandchildren. Let love guide your hands, not greed." Tears blurred my eyes as I finished reading. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of Grandma's old grandfather clock. Daniel's face crumbled, just for a second, before rage took its place. "You think you've won?" he growled, voice low and shaking. "You have no idea what you've started." I tightened my grip on the letter. It wasn't about winning. It was about honoring her. Daniel stormed out again, but this time he didn't slam the door. He left it swinging wide open, creaking in the cold morning wind. Aunt Maria wiped her eyes and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You did the right thing," she whispered. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Later that afternoon, as we gathered to start the legal process of redistributing the estate, My phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. Meet me. Alone. 5 p.m. By the old barn. My heart pounded painfully in my chest. The old barn sat at the far edge of Grandma's property, abandoned and forgotten, the kind of place where secrets stayed buried. I showed the message to Aunt Maria. She frowned but said nothing. This was something I had to face myself. The sky was already darkening when I headed out, the wind cold against my skin. The barn loomed ahead, broken and sagging under its own weight. I stepped inside, the door creaking behind me. In the shadows, Daniel waited, anger and desperation in his eyes. And as he stepped forward, I realized he wasn't here to talk. The barn door groaned as it shut behind me, trapping the dying light outside. Daniel stood there, breathing heavily, fists curled at his sides. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two halves of the same broken family, standing on ground soaked with old memories. You ruined everything, he hissed, stepping closer. You think Grandma loved you more? You think you deserved it? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. No one deserved anything, Daniel. She just wanted us to be a family. He laughed bitterly, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed through the hollow barn. Family? That's rich coming from you. You're just like the rest of them, judging, waiting for me to fail. The weight of his pain hung heavy in the air. I could almost feel it, how deeply he had believed the lies he told himself. You don't have to keep fighting, I said softly. You can still be part of this. We can still fix it. For a split second, I saw the boy he used to be, scared, angry, lost, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He reached into his jacket, pulling out something that glinted coldly in the dim light. My heart froze. In Daniel's hand was not a weapon, but a thick stack of papers folded and frayed. He threw them at my feet. Take it, he barked. It's the deed to the farmhouse, the only thing left that's worth anything. I bent down slowly, picking up the papers with shaking hands. As I scanned them, my chest tightened. The deed had been signed over, not to him, but to a shady company Daniel had secretly formed months before Grandma's death. He had been planning to sell it all along. You were going to sell Grandma's home? I asked, my voice breaking. Daniel shrugged, looking away. She's gone. It's just wood and nails now. No, I said, stepping closer. It's not. It's everything she stood for. Every Sunday dinner, every birthday, every story she ever told us. He looked up sharply, something flickering behind his angry facade. I realized then. Daniel wasn't just greedy. He was grieving, in the only way he knew how. I'm not here to take anything from you, I said. I'm here to save what's left. For a long, long moment, he said nothing. Then, voice rough and raw, he whispered, How? We stood in the dusty barn, two stubborn hearts beating loudly against the silence. You could fight us, I said. Drag it through court, tear the family apart forever. He stared at me, jaw tight. Or, I continued, you could help. You could fix what you broke. Daniel laughed, not cruelly this time, but almost bitterly amused. You still think I'm worth saving? I shrugged. Grandma did. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of rain. Finally, Daniel sagged against one of the wooden beams, the fight draining out of him. You'll never trust me, he muttered. Maybe not right away, I admitted. But trust is built, like anything worth having. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Slowly he nodded. A tiny, fragile hope bloomed in my chest. We walked back to the house together, not side by side, not yet, but close enough that the distance between us didn't feel impossible anymore. And waiting at the porch was Aunt Maria, arms crossed, face stern, but tears glistening in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of our family. Maybe it was the beginning of something stronger. But not everyone was ready to forgive just yet. The house smelled like coffee and warm bread again, just like it used to. But the air was different, heavier, uncertain. Inside, the family sat in a tight circle around the living room. No one spoke as Daniel and I entered. All eyes were on him. Aunt Maria rose first, her rosary glinting in the afternoon light. "Daniel," she said, voice shaking, "you broke our hearts." Daniel looked at the floor. For the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just said, "I know." I watched a tear roll down Aunt Maria's cheek. Silence stretched painfully between us. Then, one by one, the others spoke. Some with anger, some with sadness, some with a trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. When it was my turn, I said simply, "We can't erase what happened, but we can decide what happens next." Daniel nodded, eyes red, voice rough. "I want to make it right, however long it takes." It wasn't a grand apology, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and somehow, that made all the difference. Still, none of us knew what tomorrow would bring, and deep down I wondered, could forgiveness truly heal everything? 2 weeks later, the lawyer called us all back together. The estate, the farmhouse, Grandma's savings, all of it was being fairly divided according to her hidden letter. The company Daniel had created to sell the farmhouse was dissolved. The land would stay in the family. But that wasn't the only surprise. The lawyer cleared his throat, pulling out one last envelope. "Your grandmother left a special instruction for today." Inside was a small yellowed card, in Grandma's handwriting, and a tiny tarnished key taped to the top. "For the one who chooses love over greed, unlock the old hope chest at the foot of my bed." My heart jumped. We rushed back to the farmhouse, everyone crowding around the dusty cedar chest that had sat untouched for years. With trembling hands, I fit the tiny key into the lock. It clicked open. Inside were bundles of old letters, photographs, a patchwork quilt Grandma had sewn for her future great-grandchildren, and a thick envelope filled with savings she had hidden away. Enough to rebuild the farmhouse. Enough to start fresh. A gasp rippled through the room. Grandma had never trusted money in banks. She trusted us. We sat in a circle on the living room floor, passing around the old photographs, laughing and crying in turns. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the memories, the second chances, the promise that we could be better. Daniel sat quietly by the window, a picture of himself as a boy cradled in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes met mine, full of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Gratitude, humility, hope. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. Life would never be perfect. Old wounds didn't heal overnight. But together, we were stitching something new. A family, imperfect but real, bound not by inheritance or blood, but by the choice to love. I smiled as I folded Grandma's letter carefully, tucking it close to my heart. She had always known. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's written in a will, it's the love we choose to carry forward. If you found this story moving, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. There are so many more powerful, true-to-heart stories waiting for you. Don't miss them.